Okay, Wildcat, so we're on journal page 78, composition of functions. F of g equals fg of x. G of f equals g of f of x. Note, composition of functions is when you put one function inside of or in place of x. If you would update your notes. Okay, now your notes are updated. Let's take a look at the examples. Okay, journal page 78. Write each composition function, say the domain and range. So we have fg of x. So that means we're putting g of x into f of x. Well, that would mean that's f of g of x, which is x squared, okay? So we're plugging x squared in for x in f of x. So that's equal to 1 divided by 2 times x squared. All right? Now, at this point, we need to understand domain and range, okay? Now, we want to put plus 0, okay? That's where your range is affected by. And here we need to set the denominator equal to 0 to understand and help identify the domain. Okay, so we're going to set 2x squared equal to 0. Well, we divide both sides by 2, so you get x squared equals 0. We'll take the square root of both sides. You get x equals 0. So your domain would be negative infinity to 0 or 0 to infinity. Now for the range, that's negative infinity to 0 or 0 to infinity. All right, go ahead and finish up example 1. All right, now let's take a look at example 2. So g of f of x. So that's g of f of x is 1 divided by 2x. So that means we're putting 1 divided by 2x in for x in g of x. So that's equal to 1 divided by 2x squared. Well, that equals 1 squared is 1, divided by 2 squared is 4, and x squared is x squared. All right. Now, for the domain and range, well, first of all, we know that's plus 0, okay? That 0 is what's going to affect the range, but now we set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. So 4x squared equal to 0. Well, we divide by 4, take the square root of both sides. It's very simple. X equals 0. All right? So domain is negative infinity to 0 or 0 to infinity. Range, again, because of that 0, it's negative infinity to 0 or 0 to infinity. All right, example 3. And all right, so that's g of h of x. Well, h of x is x minus 8. So we're plugging x minus 8 into g. So that's to x minus 8 squared. Well, that's x minus 8 times x minus 8. So now we FOIL. X times x is x squared. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x. Negative 8 times negative 8 is a positive 64. When you simplify, you get x squared minus 16x plus 64. Okay, so we know domain for a quadratic is negative infinity to positive infinity. And then for range, let's go ahead and graph it and take a look at the range. So I'm going to go to on, and let me adjust the lighting on this calculator real quick. It's about as good as it's going to get. Okay, so we can go to new document, no, add graph, and let's graph parentheses x minus 8 squared. Okay, now remember, it's hard to see that, it's a little bit better. Now remember, range is from bottom to top. So here, it's from 0 to infinity, including 0, okay, because it actually touches at 0. So the range is bracket 0 to infinity. All right, let's take a look at example 4. All right, so we're doing f of k of x. So that's f of k of x is the square root of x. So we're plugging the square root of x into f. So that's to 1 divided by 2 times the square root of x. Okay. All right. So we have a couple things going on here for domain and range. First off, the number under the square root cannot be negative. So you have to take root of x greater than or equal to 0. Okay? I'm sorry, not the square root of x. The x. There you go. Much better. The x underneath the square root has to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay? But because of the fraction, we know a number divided by 0 is undefined. So x can also not equal 0. Okay? So with this idea here, well, if x cannot be 0, okay, it has to be greater than or equal to 0, we can say that x has to be greater than 0. Okay? Now with that said, for domain, that means domain is parentheses 0 to infinity. Now, this is somewhat of a complicated graph because you have a square root in the denominator. So for the range, let's go ahead and take a look at the graph and see what happens. So we're going to go to on, new document, no, add graph, control divide 1 divided by 2, control square root of x. So here, you see that it never touches 0, and it's increasing to infinity. So the range would be parentheses 0 to infinity. All right, go and finish up example 4. All right, let's take a look at example 5. Okay, so now we're finding the value. So we're doing hg of 2. So that's h. So we're plugging in 2 for g. So that's 2 squared, which would be h of 4, which now we're plugging 4 into h, which would be 4 minus 8, which equals negative 4. All right, example 6. So that's f of k of 4. So we're plugging in 4 into k, so that's the square root of 4, which we know the square root of 4 is 2. So that's f of 2. So we're plugging in 2 for f, so that's 1 divided by 2 times 2, which equals 1 divided by 4. All right, go ahead and finish up example 5 and 6. All right, write each composite function, state the domain and range. Okay, so now we're doing f of g of x. Now, f of x and g of x are different now in 7 and 8. Okay, so now that's f of, well, g of x is 2 divided by x minus 1, which equals, so we're plugging this in for x in f of x. So that's equal to 5 parentheses 2 times x minus 1 plus 2. Okay, so that's equal to 5 times 2 is 10. So that's 10 divided by x minus 1 plus 2. Now, the issue you have is that you can't add these unless the denominator is the same. So if this divided by 1, we need to multiply this by x minus 1 times x minus 1. Okay, so that equals 10 plus 2 times x is 2x, and then 2 times negative 1 is minus 2. Divided by, since they now both have the same denominator, x minus 1. Well, simplify the numerator, so 10 minus 2 is 8. So this is 8 plus 2x divided by x minus 1. All right, now we know it's rational, okay? So we need to understand that 1 minus 1 makes it undefined, okay? So for domain, we know it's negative infinity to 1 or 1 to infinity. Now, for the range, what we need to do is find the horizontal asymptote or slant asymptote, okay? So we need to do long division. So that's x minus 1 divided by, and I'm going to rewrite this as 2x plus 8. Okay, so you ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x by to give you 2x? The answer to that is 2. Since there's no x, we know that this is a horizontal asymptote at y equals 2. That means the range is negative infinity to 2 or 2 to infinity. All right, go ahead and finish up example 7. All right, let's take a look at example 8. All right, so that's g of f of x. Well, f of x is 5x plus 2. So you're plugging that into x for g of x. So that's equal to 2 divided by 5x plus 2 minus 1. Well, that equals 2 divided by 5x plus 1. Well, we know for the domain we need to set 5x plus 1 equal to 0. Subtract 1 from both sides, you get 5x equals negative 1. Divide both sides by 5, x equals negative 1 divided by 5. So your domain is negative infinity to negative 1/5 or negative 1/5 to infinity. Okay. Now, for the range, we need to find the slant or horizontal asymptote. So we take 5x plus 1 divided by, technically that would be 0x plus 2. Well, you ask yourself, what do you multiply 5x to give you 0x? The answer to that is 0. So you have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. So your range would be negative infinity to 0 or 0 to infinity. All right, if you would, go ahead and finish up your examples, start working on your assignment, and have a wonderful Wildcat day.